Hello, everybody. We did it. We made it to Design Systems Community Toronto meetup number 11, our second meetup for 2021. Please help yourself to a relaxing seat. And today, our meetup is Inside Design Systems, part of a series where we interview teams with dedicated design systems. And today's design system is Canvas. Before we get on with the show, let's just spend a minute to do a land acknowledgement. The land I am standing on today is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. As for yourselves, please respect the code of conduct. There is one available on our website, but in simplicity, respect others, keep it legal, play nice, uphold the conduct and our values, and of course, protect your privacy. Hello, everyone on YouTube. I see you, but do you see us? My name's Enrico. I'm a developer by trade, and this is my co-host, Varun.
Hey, everyone. My name is Varun. I'm the product lead for the checkout piece at TELUS Digital at Telco in Toronto. I'll pass it to Lucy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lucy List. I'm a design manager at Shopify core marketing team. And you might notice someone new on the board. So everybody, welcome to Donna. So Donna's been volunteering with a design system in Toronto ever since we started. So almost 2 years ago. It's crazy how time flies. So she's been helping with us behind the scenes, setting up our meetups. And when we went virtual, she's been also helping us behind the scenes with social and marketing. So I'm excited to have her join our Toronto chapter as a chapter lead. So I'll pass it to Donna to introduce herself.
It's coming up multiple ways.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Donna Vitan. Right now I'm the design lead for the design systems for TELUS Digital. And we're currently working on a really exciting project, and it's actually the evolution of the TELUS design system. And it's like a really big thing because it's becoming a design system of design systems. So that's really exciting for me. Also, I've been a member of the Design Tokens community group. So that's founded by Gina Ann and Kayla Delmo Prima, the leading experts that helped coin the term design tokens. And so that's very exciting. I know people are talking a lot about that. And one way to learn about it is get to be part of the group. And like Lucy said, I've been volunteering for the design systems community from the beginning, and I've worked with Varun, Lucy, and Enrico from the TELUS design system as well. And I'm looking forward to contributing as a Toronto chapter lead. So, hi.
Welcome. Awesome. So we'll just jump in. As usual, we'll talk about our values. So we have 7 values. We wanted to quickly chat about. I hold them near and dear to my heart, something that we reflect on each and every time we make decisions with respect to design systems and design systems community, making sure that as members and as leaders that we are continuing to embody these values in the work we do and how we conduct ourselves. So super, super important. Next slide. So we're trying to make our meetups as engaging as possible and trying to engage our audience, especially being remote. So making it more of an interactive event. So we have Slido set up. So if you have any questions, please click on the link in YouTube to submit your questions, and we will address them live today. So that's the URL. And so please post questions there. We're going to start off the first one with which city are you joining from? So this is just for us to make sure that Slido is working for everyone and an opportunity for you to just let us know where you're where you're from and where you're joining from. So I'll just give a few minutes for that to happen, and then maybe we can see the results.
Which city am I joining from today?
Is it like a?
It changes almost once every 10 years. While I pull that up, I see lots of entries are showing up. We have Edmonton, welcome. We have Halifax, how's the weather? And let's get this into a new screen window.
Nice.
Wow.
Cool. Wow, Netherlands.
Well, isn't that, even though this is Design Systems Community Toronto, we're online, right? Everyone is welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And someone's from Toronto, which is the alternative dimension of Toronto. Nice. Thank you all for joining.
Yeah, thank you all for joining today. Hopefully we will have a super interesting and lots of good discussions happening. But before we start, I just wanted to take a moment to thank our sponsors. As usual, we wouldn't be kind of here today without our sponsors and our volunteers. So thank you so much to Wrangle, our gold sponsor, and Scotiabank our silver sponsor, Scotiabank, who is here today to talk about Canvas, but we'll get into that later. And again, thank you for our volunteers who are behind the scenes and helping us. And today we actually have Annie, who is designer turned developer, who is live tweeting this meetup as we speak. So connect with her and reach out. So thank you again to all of our sponsors and volunteers. And now to the agenda. So we've gone through housekeeping and introductions at 12:10. So we're ahead of schedule, which is awesome. We'll have the Canvas team introduce themselves and talk about their team experiences with Canvas. And then at 12:30, we'll jump into panel discussions with Q&A, and then we'll close out at 1:15. So hopefully we'll be on time, but I think it's going to be an exciting meetup with lots of good conversations and discussions. So I will introduce, I guess, Varun and Donna today as our host of the meetup. Take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, we're going to get started with the Scotiabank Canvas team showing us a presentation. So I'll pass it on to the team now. Welcome.
Hey, super excited to be here, and thanks again for the invite. We're super lucky to be here sharing some of our learning. So I'll start sharing my screen now, and hopefully everything works well for everyone. So everyone should see our cover slide here. And so let me talk a little bit about Canvas, and then we'll get to introduce the team and the team members joining us today. Canvas is Scotiabank's global design system, and we've been since the early days. Canvas started around early 2017. Since those early days, we've been trying to communicate really clearly what Canvas is and why do we exist within the organization. And our purpose statement has been really fundamental to help us do that, to align expectations and to make sure everyone knows what to expect from the work we're doing. And so Canvas exists to enable consistent end-to-end digital experiences across all user journeys. And we've been trying to use this language every time we communicate. I won't lie, it's been evolving, of course, as we learn and go. And we've been, in this latest iteration, been doubling down in consistency. We want to make sure that everyone kind of is on board and understands that that's really our focus area. And so in terms of technology, Canvas has been supporting teams creating digital experiences in 4 different technologies, 3 on the development side and 1 on the design side. So really, we have 4 libraries today. We switched recently to Figma, which was a whole adventure by itself, and we're happy to talk about that later. But we've been in Figma for over a year now. And in Figma, we have around 183 components, including their variants. And on the engineering side, the counterpart of those components are on React, iOS, and Android. React, about 81 components, iOS 33, and Android 21. So it's really the size of our catalog. And we try to make sure that all our libraries are in sync, which has been a big challenge. And that's why we're really starting to work on decoupling some of the theme definitions so we can have design tokens. Donna was talking about that earlier. We're really starting to implement design tokens so that we can have all those definitions agnostic to the technology and usable not just by the libraries that we have, but also by putting them out there so that teams can also use them in their own experiences directly. Apart from that, we've been really partnering with a lot of teams out there. And in particular, most of the experiences that teams have been building with our 4 libraries have been on the authenticated side. So, like online banking and the mobile app and all that good stuff. But we've also been partnered with .com. And so we're really happy to share that we're going to be supporting .com in the near future, which is really exciting. And so let's talk a little bit about the team. We're a team. Our team is called Canvas Ops. This is the team behind the Canvas design system. And we're really a mix of professionals from design, engineering, product, QA, and accessibility. It's really a mix of skills that brings us together to support this design system. And today we have a couple of team members joining. And let me pass it over to you, Jason.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jason. I go by the pronouns he and him, and I am the visual design lead on Canvas.
You might be muted, Conway.
Oh, yeah, I didn't went live yet. So, hi everyone. I'm Conway. I'm the solution architect for Canvas and other teams as well. My pronouns is he and him. Earl?
Hi there. I'm Earl Cousins. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm a digital accessibility expert at Scotiabank, and I work quite a bit with the Canvas team as well.
And hey everyone, I'm Eduardo. I am director for the design system here at Scotia, and super excited to be here with you today. And so our team has been growing lately. We're super lucky that we've been getting a lot of support from leadership and our stakeholders. And we have 2 of our mobile devs joining. They joined recently, Masum on the Android side, Jamie on the iOS side. But we also have some new full-time roles that are incremental to what used to be the blueprint of our team. Varinia, our new product manager, and Kartik, our new full-time QA engineer. So hey everyone, you might all be around. We're super happy to have you, and this is really thanks to the support we've been getting from our stakeholders. So we're super lucky to have all that support from the organization. And so thanks to all the work the team has been doing, we've been able to partner with a lot of teams out there to be able to not just create a set of components and patterns that they can reuse, but also make sure that they're making them into the experiences. And so in this screen, you can see a couple of screenshots of some of the different moments of the user journey and how some of those experiences are starting to look like visually. But we've also been able to partner with a lot of those teams to get in some key features within our design system, like, for example, dark mode. That's been just like a pretty amazing adventure and lots of learnings for sure. We started supporting dark mode last year, and since then we've continued to support it in every new thing that comes out. And so themes are now a thing in Canvas, and we've been learning a lot in that space. And thanks to all those partnerships, we've started to actually see a lot of kind of impact and start to actually be able to perceive that impact thanks to the work of the team. We've been tracking that impact in our dashboards, and we now can see the trends of, for example, adoption. In this graph, you can see how design components have been adopted in time by teams, and we're seeing exponential growth in adoption. As I mentioned, we switched over to Figma last year, really early last year. So we started kind of migrating everyone over from Sketch, and so you can see how some of those movements are starting to reflect in the actual numbers that Figma provides us with. And so here we can see that there's over 70,000 component inserts in projects. This is design only. We'll get into the development piece in the next slide. And this implies over 350 year-over-year growth if we compare with the same time last year. So it's been pretty amazing in terms of adoption growth. On the engineering side, it's also been interesting to actually be able to see things. You know, when you're working in design systems, it's sometimes hard to track and be able to see the impact of your work. And so this has really helped us make tangible all that impact and be able to focus our efforts where we need to focus them. And so on the development side, our libraries have started gaining traction. You can see in this slide on the React front, there's been pretty much exponential growth as well. The adoption of those components has been skyrocketing, about 14,000 components inserted in projects in the last quarter, which implies about over 600% year-over-year growth, again, comparing it to the same time last year. This was really kind of unexpected for us when we started kind of seeing these numbers, and has since given us a lot of insight into how can we continue growing and where do we focus. But talking about focus, you can see here, for example, Android and iOS have very different kind of adoption rates. And this is partly because a lot of the teams in Scotia are building web experiences. There's about 200 kind of teams using components on the React front, or there are about 200 projects, not teams. And on the mobile side, it's more around 10, 20. So obviously the numbers are different. I think it's unfair to compare Android, iOS, and React as well. But this also gives us a lot of insight into where do we need to focus, and where do we need to start adding a little bit more of our time so we can continue driving these numbers and working with teams in those spaces. And finally, the last slide is really around contribution. We've been really starting to roll out our contribution model since late 2019, and since then we've seen different peaks in time, which is really interesting. This works very differently than adoption from what we've been learning. You know, every quarter there's a different needs. There's different moments of the product development cycle. Not every team will need to contribute new components every time. But we've also been learning a lot in terms of how do we streamline our process and how do we improve the experience, the contribution experience for people, so we can continue getting as many contributions as we can. So we had our peak quarter in mid-2020. 34 contributions around that time, and in our last quarter we've had like 10 contributions, and these are contributions in general for all the different libraries, but we also track contributions per country, per contributor, so we have a lot of granularity in our data as well. And so before I pass it back to the team, we've been working with teams in 6 countries. Digital banking in Scotia has offices in 6 countries, so we get to work with people in Canada, as well as Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Peru, and Dominican Republic. So it's been amazing to be able to work with so many people, you know, out there. And thanks to all those partnerships, we've managed to help deliver value to over 25 million customers. So it's pretty humbling to see how one initiative can have so much impact out there. And I'll pass it back to the team. Happy to get into the questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Eduardo and team. That was a fantastic introduction to the Canvas design system and the team and the things you're doing. So just for the audience, we are going to split the section into two. The first is going to be some questions that we've received from the audience prior to the meetup and some panel questions that we've prepared for the Scotia team. And once we are done with that, we are going to go to Slido and pick questions, or pick the top most voted question that the audience is asking. So we'll do a Q&A with the audience as well. So that's the format. Let's get into the panel discussion. So Eduardo, you spoke a lot about the design systems and the impacts and the charts that you showed us. But one favorite question of mine is challenges with design systems. So I don't know if it's like probably the entire team. Can you help me identify or tell us what are the biggest challenges for the Canvas design system today?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say one of the biggest challenges is providing support to 500 plus designers and devs. You know, having to switch from design to support and back and forth again over the course of a sprint, that can be really challenging, really demanding. And support is really important for a role. You know, it probably takes about 20 to 40% of our day-to-day responsibilities. You know, we get all kinds of inquiry types, you know, like I found a bug, or I have a question, or prove my contribution. Then you get into onboarding and training too. And, you know, we don't want Canvas to be a bottleneck for any team. You know, we want to have timely responses and set those expectations. And that's why solid documentation is really important, you know, to have those built-in efficiencies.
Yeah, from my side, the most challenging thing for me will be continuously improving developer experience. We are talking design system here, but there is a huge piece from my side for engineering as well. Without a good developer experience, we will be hardly have a good adoption rate as well as contribution rate. So that is the most challenging thing in my mind for a design system.
I think for me, from an accessibility point of view, what I'm looking at as a challenge that I'm looking to address in the near future is around mobile web. And so we have really solid React-based components and also mobile native components. And so when we start to get into responsive views and adaptive web and web views within mobile apps, then some of those expectations can change, and we need to look at and be aware of the and look at the consistency between those and kind of strike a balance there between consistency and being true to those platforms.
Yeah, and just to add to what the team was saying, I mean, we're supporting teams creating digital banking experiences in 6 countries, and so it's a very particular context, I think, for a design system. You know, there's pretty much similar user journeys being created in all these spaces, and so there's definitely that side of the equation. How do we prioritize and who do we work with for what? That's always an ongoing challenge, and we're actually trying out a new operating model to help us do that in a more strategic way. But also, as Earl was saying, like mobile in general, I think is tricky, it's challenging. How do you enable for you know, mobile versus web innovation? You want to have things that feel natural to the user in each one of the mobile platforms, but you also want to enable designers to be able to create mobile web experiences, and you don't want the experience to feel fragmented when jumping from a native piece to like a web embedded piece. So that's always like something we're being mindful of. And contribution, I mean, scaling contribution, improving our processes, I think that's an ongoing challenge, but we're always kind of like going back and revisiting our definition of done, what's our process, how do we improve it, how do we make it so that it's a better experience for people out there.
That's a lot of challenges. And how do you prioritize them? Like, is there any specific strategy that you used to prioritize some of these challenges over the others?
I'll take us up. So yeah, I think it really comes down to what's resonating more at each moment in time. Like, for example, we're at a time now where there's like the team has been growing. There's a lot of designers and developers that have joined the organization recently, and education and training is just like a critical piece right now. And so we're prioritizing in our Q4 kind of OKRs the revisiting our training and education documents and all that kind of material. So that's, for example, like an example of how we do it. But I think it really turns down to being out there and checking out what's going on, what's resonating more, what type of feedback are we getting from people. You think of a design system as a product, and you tend to think you need to be fully focused on the product, but we sometimes forget about the people aspect of the thing. And I think the people side is really important, like building relations and making sure that people are being honest with you. You're creating this space where everyone can say what they feel, and you can be gathering that feedback as you go to be able to prioritize in a much more, like in a more meaningful way.
No, that's great. Definitely, I think the users are so important. So it totally makes sense. Thanks. I'm actually going to pass it to Donna for the next question.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Like you said, it's so important that you focus on the people using your design system. And so that brings me to my question, which is, and this is something that you've all mentioned of adoption. So what are some, can you tell us a little bit more about how you're helping adoption, about what tools and what kind of processes you have in place?
For sure. Yeah, I would say that adoption is arguably the most important benchmark for our success. You know, you can have the most amazing looking design system, but if nobody uses it, it's kind of a failure, you know. I would also say that good documentation and adoption are synonymous, you know. I think back to about 1.5 years ago when we were using Confluence and Sketch and Zeppelin and Envision, and how different that is to compared to today, where we're just using Figma and Storybook, you know, which is obviously a more streamlined experience for us. So concise documentation translates to a better understanding of what the design system can do and how to use it. You know, you take our buttons, for example, I think there's 5 in Canvas, you know, to the uninitiated, what do those 5 buttons do? Why are they different? You know, documentation is the only thing that can answer that. So yeah, that's really important. And addressing common questions that come up through our community channels like Slack and Teams. You know, if you're getting the same questions over and over again, that demands to be answered in documentation as well. Yeah, and I would say also tools. As Eduardo mentioned, analytics is huge for us. You know, to be able to see how teams are using your components, seeing the most widely used components, the ones that are less used, and then seeing how those components are used by those teams, by those designers, that's huge for us. Onboarding and training, that's another one. You know, the reality is designers, they come and go over the years. You know, so what does Canvas look like to new employees? You know, how do they use the design system? You know, questions like, how do I contribute? Or why should I contribute? You know, those are really, really important answers to have for new employees. Another thing that Eduardo touched on were partnerships. You know, if you want to ensure adoption, you know, you work with those teams that you're building those components with. You know, if you build them for teams that actually need those components, that's adoption right there in and of itself. But ultimately, we have to be ready and willing to change. You know, there's always going to be new ways to make your design system better. As designers and developers, we really need to challenge that status quo. You know, I think back to, you know, when we switched from Sketch to Figma, you know, we just finished building the library out. We built out all the new components, and then Figma introduces auto layout. And then 2 months later, and then you make those changes. And then 2 months later, it's variants. Now, obviously, there's an investment of time, but obviously you're going to do it because the experience is so much better. So being willing to invest that time. And we're doing something similar right now with migrating from Style Guidance to Storybook. And that's the right experience for us. There's nothing to say. I'm not saying, choose one or the other. Every design system has its own challenges, its own needs, and its own tool set. But yeah, constantly evaluating those are really important. Suffice to say, technologies change, processes change, tools change. I can't ever imagine the day when you say the design system is done. You're always improving. You're always looking for new ways to improve adoption. That's just the nature of digital products.
Yeah, thank you so much. I like how you got into like things are always changing, and I think Eduardo, part of your presentation also touched on like having tracking and measuring, and so as things change, how do you measure and have how do you measure the impact of those partnerships and kind of processes? How do you track the progress of your design system with all these changes?
Yeah, let me try that. Tracking is a very tricky thing as well. We know we are enterprise. We know we need numbers to prove and help us to survive as a team, to prove to leaderships. Tracking is a big part of that. So we, in general, for tools, we use Jira and Bitbucket. We do actually have a Kanban board, Scrum board, to help us to go through different processes. The Kanban board usually will helping us on the commitment side or contribution side of management. The Scrum will be helping the teams to actually doing some development works, spikes and stuff like that. And alongside with all the beautiful charts that Eduardo has been showing, all those are behind numbers. And what we have done is we have been scraping data from our repository. And luckily, like Scotiabank do have one single repository for 90% of the projects. So we can easily go through most of them and get a educated numbers from there for like which components has been inserted how many times in different projects, and we collect all those data and multiple snapshot of time, and then we aggregate them so that we can see the trending, and we put them into a dashboard from Google Data Studio to help us to visualize all the changes and all the trends and things that's happening outside that without our knowing. One of the beautiful thing about design system is that people don't have to go through us to onboard. Like they look at the documentation. Oh, okay, I can use this, and then they go right. So, so we have to do it the other way to find out how we provide that impact to different teams in the organization.
Thank you. So that's great when you have data to measure. I think this is going to go into a question of like a little bit harder to measure, but I'm wondering if there's a way. The question is more like having all these components and processes. How do you measure and ensure that you're creating accessible solutions in Canvas?
Thanks, Donna. So our approach at the bank has always been more from a user experience point of view rather than a outright conformance point of view. And so really the way we handle digital accessibility in a lot of ways is determining what is the desired behavior that we want to put in front of the user. And then aligning that with the technical standards, so in this case, WCAG. And then we write some tests, and then we do that mapping so that we can determine if a certain failed test or unmet expected behavior, then what gap does that align to in WCAG, for example, right? And so what this does is the fact that Canvas is operates in countries outside of Canada, what this also lets us do allows us to meet accessibility standards across the company and also in these other countries where perhaps there's less legal risk around accessibility, less legislation, or less business awareness of accessibility in general. And so in that way, we also get to implement best practices and be kind of future focused in those other markets, right? And so getting into maybe some more of the detail around the actual process. What we do is we work with the designers, so primarily Jason and some of the other contributors. And so they would gather the use cases that they're looking to meet and document some of the UI behaviors that they're looking to put in place. And so then we consult with them, myself mostly, on the accessibility criteria that would be needed for that. We use that a lot in our user stories with product owners. And then we also align those with testing methods so that we end up with testable criteria that aligns with standards, right? And so within all of that conversation, if there is research that myself, that I need to do, or if there's questions or discussions that I need to bring back to the rest of the accessibility SMEs, then I take that on, and we have our own separate conversations and our own separate robust process for determining our decisions around specific accessibility concerns. And so some of the outcomes of those would be, some of the typical artifacts would be the actual components themselves, so the actual code, the design specifications, there's written design guidelines, component documentation, accessibility test cases, etc. And so we also have, just to also pick up on whether trackability is something we've been working on over the last year or so, is actually the capability to dashboard accessibility conformance data of projects. We did this working with our folks who run our Jira instance, and we had some custom fields put into Jira so that we can track not only if issues are accessibility issues, but what type they are. For example, if they're a result of screen reader testing or color contrast testing. And so we have data about that we are starting to leverage, both in order to help teams visualize where they are from an accessibility point of view, but also for our team to then build on our training capabilities and train to fill any gaps that we're starting to see and any patterns.
Thank you. So a lot of that, I feel like it's a shared responsibility between the team and the contributors. So I think this is going to be an interesting question that I'm going to hand off to Varun.
Thanks for sharing that, Earl. In the presentation, there's a lot of mention about like partners in other countries. And there was a lot of focus on like documentation creation because of the scale that you work on. So I really want to understand how like Canvas team is scaling their contribution model, and how do you get folks to not only use your system but also contribute into it?
Yeah, thanks, Varun. With scaling anything, first step is to have a very clear process on how you can do things like contribution, how can use this, the system themselves, and how to use it correctly with documentations. So those pieces are the key for that. And for example, the process, we have multiple entry points for contributions, right? We do have a net new components that might be proposed by community members or from different teams. Or we can have developers identify, oh, I need to extend some kind of properties so that I can do something better or easier. That is another kind. So I'll give the example of from a net new perspective. So if a member suggesting, oh, we should have this as a component to put into the system, we normally will start with a conversation. So we will gather the team with designers, with accessibility, and the designers from the team who is trying to do the contributions, and we talk it through all the use cases and some of the behaviors that is required for those, so that we can start creating the design documentation first before we actually start developing the components themselves and may be contributed by the team. But in general, we will start with designs, documentations, before we scale to the actual developments. And the other thing is like the architecture needs to be super friendly. As I mentioned before, it's a challenge as the design system grow, different technology platforms have different requirements, and we are trying our best to keep it as simple as possible. If not, we will have to document that in our contribute MD, in the repos, or in Storybook to make it very clear for people on how you should be contributing into the system. As we're moving on to maybe mono repos and things like that, it can be getting more and more challenging. So that's why we are ramping up our training materials, documentations as well, in order for us to support the scaling of that. On the other side, like as you mentioned, we are working with a lot of different countries in Southern America. The other challenge is they are speaking in Spanish in most cases. They do understand English, but it's not primary. As you know, it will not be the same. So we are expanding our documentations and try to accommodate that to include Spanish as well. This is a big overtaking that we try to improve. So hopefully by next year, we'll have something to show you and say, hey, this is a success for you, for us.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And do you think that's going to be a big endeavor to, translate or get everything into the Spanish mode? Like, what do you think the effort's going to be for that?
I don't know how to scale it other than using the word huge. I think it will be interesting to see, because the documentation that we have now is in Figma and Storybook. So Storybook's side, I think, is relatively okay to do the translation easily. But when we have design and behaviors in Figma and whole nine yards, I think that might take some more time. I will pass it to Jason to give some comments on that.
No, yeah, we definitely want to have the Spanish contingent of that. I know on the accessibility side, that's something that we're already practicing, right? So it's just building on that, really.
Absolutely.
Very, very cool. Awesome. I know we want to get to our questions from the audience. So we have a couple more on our side. So I'll ask the next one. And I think everyone can probably answer this one because it's interesting. It's like, what's the one thing that you are most proud for the time that you've been with the Canvas team that you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I would say the partnerships, the relationships. When I reflect back on when I started, maybe about, I guess it's been about 2 years now. Prior to that, the biggest company I'd ever worked for was about 150 people. Obviously, the bank is exponentially bigger than that. And it takes time to figure things out, especially if you're working on a design system. Dave Lang, the creative director at Scotia, once said to me, when I first started, it takes about 6 months, to figure it out. The processes, the teams, the people, it takes time to build those relationships. Nothing happens overnight. But those relationships are probably the most important part of my role. You know, everything that we build in Canvas is in concert with the other designers and developers. You know, we don't build anything exclusively of those real use cases. You know, and without those relationships, you know, Canvas wouldn't be what it is today. And I would also add that accessibility, you know, how can you forget that? I am so proud that accessibility is at the heart of Canvas, you know, working closely with Earl and the accessibility team to grow and shape the design system. Personally speaking, has fundamentally reformed my own design process, my own thinking. You know, getting to work with super passionate, amazingly smart people, that makes me super proud, you know. And you never really stop learning in this space. You know, we're getting into data viz a little bit, and there's some new challenges there, and I'm learning some new things in that space, and we're trying to solve some difficult challenges. So that's another thing that I'm certainly proud of. And then it's also worth adding too, you know, prior to the pandemic and the travel restrictions, we made a point of visiting the Latin American countries and working with those designers and working with those developers and finding out, you know, what challenges they would have. You know, obviously, if you're when we were working in a physical space, you know, you could just like talk to people in the halls and you know, you get into conversations around some of the things you're trying to solve for. When there's that physical geographic distance, you know, you don't have those same conversations. So making a point of connecting with those designers and developers on a regular basis is really important too. And certainly, once again, something I'm proud of.
Yeah, for me, the proudest things is seeing the evolution of Canvas. I've been in the bank for more than 5 years now. I have been part since the very beginning of Canvas when we started, and see all the changes, all the decisions, all the things that we try and fail and continues to improve. All the things that we have done in Canvas is make me so proud and happy that we can actually create an impact to support our customers with accessibility, with a partnership with different teams, and it is hugely graceful and for me, and happy about that.
I think for me, what I would say is the inclusiveness of the foundational work that we already have in place. So, for example, over the last couple of years, we've really looked at accessibility from quite a wide lens. So incorporating things like voice input, cognitive concerns, considering things like anxiety or color blindness are things that we've been looking at quite recently. And so I'm enthusiastic about where we can take this even further and make the system even more inclusive and talk to more users and more different types of users. That's something in this remote world we're actually able, that's kind of enabled us to actually talk to more users than perhaps we might have in the past, where we relied on them coming to the office. And so I'm enthusiastic for what that future is too.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit of my personal story, I started at Scotia in the Peru office about 5 years ago. So I got to experience the design system as a user first, while launching the new app to around 1 million customers there. And since then I moved over to this challenge, moved over to Toronto. So it's been kind of like an amazing adventure for me, both personally and professionally. But it's also about how, from touching the lives of 1 million people in Peru to touching the lives of over 25 million people in across the globe. It's just like crazy how much impact our work can have. But really going beyond the quantitative kind of side, for me, it's really about the possibility of touching the lives of people, both customers, but also inside the organization, be able to improve their experience, be able to create amazing experiences for people, for everyone, really. So that, yeah, I think that's really what makes me proud about this challenge.
thank you all for sharing that. That's a lot of accomplishments. And to get to our last question, just give us a taste of what's ahead for Canvas.
Oh my God. I think the list is long, but just to call out some of the things we've been talking about. So we have a couple of new team members, as we mentioned. So for sure, onboarding is like a key priority for us now. Like working remotely is a challenge still, and making sure that everyone is onboarded properly is our #1 priority right now. Not just for Canvas Ops team, but also to make sure that we're onboarding folks outside of the Canvas team. .com, we mentioned .com's coming. We need to figure out what that partnership would look like, and how are we gonna actually start creating components for a new technology stack. That's gonna be an interesting challenge for sure. Entering the public sites and expanding our support to not just private but also public experiences. I think that's pretty exciting to me. And then content. We haven't really talked a lot about content, and that's because we have still a lot of opportunities on that front. We've been interacting with the content team, and I think the challenge is not just like different languages, but also teams distributed in different countries, and Spanish is like different in every used in a very, very different way in each one of these countries. So I think we're still kind of like figuring that one out. There's definitely space for improvement. But for me, I feel like the biggest one beyond all these things is really shifting our focus from thinking about how we prioritize and how we define tasks in our backlog and within our design system, from focusing on visual consistency, UI consistency, consistency at a component level, to figuring out how do we actually solve for consistency at an experience level. And I think that's really the key piece here, and that's why we're starting to roll out a new operational model that will help us partner with product development teams very early in the product development cycle, so we can have aligned roadmaps that help us define what are those UX patterns that we want to create together, and what UI components should be contributed by teams within those product development kind of groups. So I think it's really about scaling the design system. Even though the team has been growing, it's still a challenge, and we will never be able to support hundreds of people out there in the same capacity. So we need to be very strategic about how we work with people and what's our role moving forward. We need to be constantly questioning our role, and I think it's really exciting that we get to really evolve how we work and what we do in time. So I think that's really kind of the bigger and more strategic piece for me.
Awesome. Well, that is the end of all the panel questions. I was just looking at Slido right now, and we have 35 questions from the audience. So the good part is that there's a lot of engagement, a lot of curiosity. But the way we're going to do this is we're going to take the top voted questions. So if you have your question in Slido, or if you'd like another question, feel free to upvote it, and we'll go in order of priority. So I'll ask the first question. The first question is from Freddie. So out of curiosity, how did you go about generating stats for the component inserts?
So we have two sides, as we mentioned. We do have Figma side that is simple. Figma gave it to us. From the technology, technical implementation piece, as I mentioned, we wrote our own script to help us to get data from Bitbucket. We used to just scrape the Bitbucket search. Embarrassing. We are improving the script as to call the API now, so that it will be more efficient to help us to get all those data and analyze them after we collect them.
Just to add to Conway's question, maybe taking a step back, like, getting into measuring and tracking is super important, but even even before that, it's really important to align what are the metrics with stakeholders and within the team, right? How are we defining, what success looks like for our design system, and what are those key metrics? And for us, we defined 4 key metrics at the start of our journey, and they're evolving, and we're adding like colors and things here and there to so that we can accommodate the learnings and things we've been seeing. But the first one is really library size. We've been seeing that the size is actually plateauing, so we're starting to think of how do we measure not just the growth of the libraries, but also improvements that we're adding to the components. The second one, which is contribution, adoption before even contribution. How many times have our libraries been imported in projects? That's one. And then the other one is really how many components have been inserted. So getting more granular so we can see. We can even, thanks to all the data Conway mentioned, we can even see how many times each component is being used, so we can get really detailed in terms of, if we're making a change to a component, how many teams is this change going to how many teams is this change going to be impacting, so we can be more mindful and also be working with them in the process of making those changes. Number 3, contribution. So we talked a little bit about contribution. We mentioned some of the things we're already kind of measuring: contribution per library, but also per country and also per contributor. So we track every single thing. We have like a leaderboard where we can keep track of our top contributors, and so we measure that. And finally, which is really starting to get into business terms, we wanted to make sure we could speak the same language that our business kind of partners speak. And so financial impact, what's the savings that our design system is bringing? And so we've been really kind of leveraging our financial model to determine that. But now that we have a lot of data available, we're really rethinking what's this model moving forward, so that all of the kind of inputs of our formula can be pulled from actual data. So we're in the process of revisiting that one.
That is amazing, and I hope the audience is taking notes, because those are really the 4 key metrics. And Conway, don't worry. Like when I was at TELUS, we scraped some sites for the data as well, so that's pretty that's pretty okay right there. All right, let's go with the next question from David. Is the whole Canvas team dedicated to the design system, or are there other areas in the business as well that they work on?
I can take that one. I think I'm the only outlier. So really everyone on the team, so the 12 people that were shown on the slide way at the back at the beginning, if people remember, all of those folks are dedicated to Canvas. And myself, I actually work on the digital accessibility team. Canvas is, however, a key strategic piece of work for us, and a key relationship for our team, because of how it does enable accessibility to permeate all of the projects that it touches. And so there's high value there. And so that's why it's a focus area for our team, and I work so closely with the Canvas team.
Awesome. Thank you, Earl. Thanks for answering that. All right, I'll pass it on to Donna.
Yeah, so this next question I'm very interested in. And the question is from Kyle, and he asks, how do you structure your Figma library? One library with all styles and components, or broken down to multiple libraries based on platform?
Yeah, I can take that one. So yeah, I mean, we've had the Figma library for about a year, and there's been lots of improvements along the way. And we've had conversations very recently about changing our structure. Currently, we have all of our platforms, so iOS, Android, and web in one library. Obviously we have different libraries for icons and documentation in that, but for the component library itself, they're all grouped together. We're actually going to change it so that we have a library for mobile, for iOS, for Android, and web. And there's a few reasons for that. One is our analytics. If you look at our analytics for Figma, I think there was a question around component inserts. And as it pertains to Figma, those analytics are specific to the enterprise account, in case you're wondering why you don't see analytics in your project. So you have to have the enterprise to get the analytics. So yeah, our analytics are a little bit skewed right now because it's all the libraries together. We want to understand those component insertions per library. But when you think about it, I mean, that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is the experience, right? If you're a mobile designer, you don't want to see web components and vice versa. And it makes for a little bit of a bloated experience. So those are two good reasons to kind of split out your libraries. But yeah, I mean, who's to say, how things will go? We'll always be trying to improve and make a better experience for our designers.
I will flag that for later. I think Varun has our next question.
Yeah, so the next question is from Sagar. It is, what does the contribution process look like at Canvas or at Scotia?
Let me take a stab at that one. It's changing all the time. We're learning and evolving it, and I think that's just how it should be. And it shouldn't be the same for every team. Like context drives a lot of how this should work. But at this point in time, we have a couple of really well-defined steps that we follow. Conway was mentioning earlier how we have those mapped in our kind of Kanban. So this really helps us structure not just the process and how we see those tickets coming through the process, but also what the definition of done for each type of ticket looks like. So we've really got into detail when it comes to that stuff. So really our process starts with what we call a contribution or request. That's how our process gets triggered at this point in time. It's probably going to change with the new model, but that's just how it works right now. So we get something, meaning request or some actual thing, and then we work with the teams in discovery. That's really like step number one. Actually, the other one's just triggering the process. So we conduct a little bit of discovery, check out what the team needs, what other teams could need as well. We want to make sure that our components are scalable. So we're always working on pulling in the people that we know that might be interested and might be important stakeholders to include earlier in the game. Then we work on the definition of what this looks like. We kind of set the scope, work with Earl and the accessibility team in figuring out what the criteria should be for this component, use cases, all the kind of basic things, behaviors, all that good stuff. And we start documenting very early in the process. We're really starting to document. We switched documentation. I think Conway was making mention of this earlier, from the end of the process to the start. We want to make sure everything is well documented from very early in the process, just so that we can have the recipe to build the component, and it doesn't really matter what the technology is. We can use that same recipe to build it both on development but also on design, which is the next step, implementation. And so the cool thing is that we've managed to get to a point where documentation can really capture all the requirements for us to actually implement the design. For us, the first step is documenting and making sure all the criteria, all the visual specifications, everything is documented, but not necessarily the actual Figma component. The Figma component requires its own, time. You need to make sure that auto layout, variants, all that good stuff is being considered, and that's just incremental time to thinking about the visual, the actual component. And so at this point in time, we can implement the design component and the development component almost at the same time. We've actually had extreme cases, where the development component has been implemented before than the design component, and it's made it into the product, which has been like amazing. But the process enables for that. And then we release both design and development, and they go in different cycles depending on what the needs are. But each one of these moments has very clear definition of done. for each step of the way, and has very clear definition of who is responsible for that moment as well, who's driving each one of those steps. So yeah, we've really tried to get super detailed into this stuff. And I don't know if there's any other thing that someone from the team, Conway, maybe, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, so the contribution also can be speaking to like bug fixes and stuff like that. We generally ask developers or designers to raise an issue ticket like it on our board so that we can have visibility of that. And then we generally ask them like, can you contribute? And if they have time, and then they can do that. And then that's a different kind of contribution we are accepting as well. We have been thinking of like improving our recognitions for the contribution as well. But like I don't think we have anything concrete to share yet. We're still thinking like maybe LinkedIn badges and things like that we have in mind, and we do have a internal tools to help us to recognize full-time employees. So that might be in play as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, recognition is so important with contribution, because people are spending their time and energy to contribute into the system, so it's so important. A follow-up to contribution is like, how do you, like you showed a team of like 10 to 12 or 15 people on the screen. How do you ensure that there's quality in the contributions you get? Like, do you have any quality standard which you'd like do reviews and sort of send them back to your users? Like, how does quality take place?
Yeah, I think Earl can speak to the accessibility part, because we built accessibility from the beginning to start. That's a very interesting thing, because we do test for accessibility, the next question there, for our components. And then from the bank point of view, we do have a very high requirement for quality. For example, unit testing coverage needs to be 80% plus. We need a fortify scan. We need a black duck scan for dependencies and things like that. Make sure they are all up to date. So those pieces of control within the pipeline actually help us to guard the quality of the component. But like visually, we still need Earl and Jason. You can speak about that too, about safeguarding the quality of the actual components.
Yeah, when it comes to contribution, we have to recognize that, you know, designers from a design perspective anyways, they're tasked with some really big projects. They don't have time to do exhaustive documentation and figure out all the nuances. And that's kind of where Canvas comes in, you know, to help kind of shepherd that, you know, make sure everything's accessible. And once again, you know, from our perspective, from the design system perspective, you know, we have that awareness of other project teams, you know, in other countries. So finding those commonalities between, hey, here's a contribution, it's a new component or improvement. What other team could potentially use that? Or how are they doing it a little bit different? Odds are, you know, you get half a dozen designers building the same thing and they're all a little bit different. Different looking, or maybe they want to do something different. So that's our role, to kind of put all the pieces together and make sure it's accessible and on brand too, right? And meet all of our design token essentials. Yeah.
Very insightful. Thank you so much. I'll pass that on to Donna now.
Yeah. So I think Jason, you mentioned that, you know, making sure that you're helping designers and developers have quality contributions. And I think part of that is making sure that it's accessible. So one of our top questions is actually, how do you test accessibility of your components?
Sure, I can take that. So as I was explaining a bit earlier, as part of our process in figuring out the use cases and the UI behaviors with the Canvas team and with perhaps with a contributor, we also arrive at a set of accessibility criteria. And so that could be, for example, specifying that buttons have visible focus indicators, for example, those kinds of concerns, documenting where different aspects of a component need to meet different color contrast requirements, etc. And so all of those criteria then map to specific tests against those criteria, which then align with WCAG checkpoints. And so we end up with testable criteria, and those tests, as we write them, they generally fall into 4 major categories. So screen reader testing, keyboard only or switch control testing, magnification or text resize testing, and color contrast / grayscale testing. And so there's those different 4 types of testing that take place on the component in order to test those criteria and make sure they pass. And then those the component criteria then also get referenced in design documentation that teams use, so that if they think that something is not right with a component, they can actually take a look at the component tests themselves, even after they've gone through testing by the Canvas team, and they can take a look at those and see if maybe they've set a parameter incorrectly and they're not getting the results they should be.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and like you said, it's not just about the test, it's making sure that, it's about people having access to that component. So we've got another question, one of my favorites, and it's from Freddie again. So the question is to the team: any suggestions on how to go about implementing design tokens and the benefits of implementing them?
Yeah, I can touch on the kind of top level of that question, and then I'll pass it over. But so as the design system starts scaling, and there's let me restart my answer. So when you're working on design systems, 100% of the components won't be used by product development teams on building an experience, won't be coming from the design system. It's probably going to be 70-80%, and there's going to be a 30% gap, 20-30%. So there's a thing there. When that experience gets shipped, you want to make sure that everything looks consistent, everything not just visually but experience-wise, and so the focus states and all that good stuff is always looking and feeling the same for the end user. And so with design tokens, what's great is that we can enable the use of design tokens to teams, not just for ourselves, but for anyone out there building their own specific components, and ensure that they're using the same definitions. If the brand changes in the future, if we figure out there's a more accessible color, we don't have to be changing those same definitions every single time in every, hopefully they're not hard-coded, but they are definitely living in different pieces of code. And that just makes it super hard to scale the experiences and maintain them. And so for maintainability purposes, design tokens become critical. But also, as we've started, we've been mentioning, we're expanding, and we have 4 libraries now, potentially splitting the design libraries to mobile and web, and also supporting .com. And so there's a lot going on. And so for us, it's really, how do we make it so that we can simplify the syncing of libraries all the time? There's just a lot of overhead right now. If one component changes on one library, we need to sync that change to the other libraries. Design, if the change started on iOS, we need to make sure that change is also replicated on React and Android and design, and everything is still consistent. So we're spending a lot of time just syncing, and we want to make sure that visual changes or key definitions of the design system can be changed once and used many times by all those different libraries. So I think those are kind of that's the case for us, at least at this point in time. And when it comes to implementation, we're in the process of that. I don't know if Jason or Conway wanna jump in, but we're literally starting to figure out what are our kind of core design tokens and alias design tokens. How are we gonna be configuring these things? We also support dark mode, as we mentioned earlier, and we also support teams working on retail products, but also wealth products. So there's like a different theming going on there. So we want to make sure that we simplify, you know, how people contribute in the future, but also simplify our lives moving forward, so that we don't have to be changing every single component, like, you know, endless times every time. I don't know if you want to add anything from the design side, Jason.
Oh, just that. Yeah, I mean, design tokens are essential once you get into theming, you know, dark theming, product theming. And I would like to say that the bigger your design system gets, the more it needs design tokens. But if you're just starting out with a design system, you need to think about that. Like at a design level, we always had those design tokens there, but it's how you implement that in technology where you know, the rubber hits the road.
Yeah, I don't have much to say about design token, but we're still figuring it out, and we are in the process of integrating that. So we'll see how it actually works for us in the long run for the multiple libraries that we have.
I didn't know about the design token community. I'll definitely sign up for that one, because there's a lot to learn about design tokens.
Absolutely.
All right. It's 1:15 p.m. So based on the agenda, we're on time. So I know there are a bunch of other questions on Slido, on YouTube, and potentially on Twitter. So we'll make a list of them and pass it on to the Canvas team and try to get it out to you on our social channels. So we'll try our best doing that. And yeah, now is a time to say thank you. A big thank you to all the participants, Earl, Jason, Eduardo, Conway. Fantastic.
Great job, guys.
Yeah, great job. Thank you for going through your system and answering questions so candidly, which is great. Yeah, pass it on to Enrico, Lucy, Donna, if you want to top up.
All right. Thank you, Scotia team, for joining. We're going to perform our closing slides and wrap up. So, for those of you in the audience, do you feel like you're inside design systems? Because I sure do. Thank you for making your time here and joining us on this lovely day, wherever you are. So many cities joined. This is something that'll be unforgettable for sure. Lots of takeaways. Thank you to our volunteer Annie for live tweeting. Lots of tasty takeaways there on Twitter. Follow us on DSCC_TOR. And we also have this feedback slide. So in the YouTube description below, you can click on our feedback form. We welcome your feedback and criticism. You can also scan the QR code with your phone. I know iPhones do this automatically. On Android, you'll need Google Lens or something else. Or you can just go to bit.ly/DSCC-TOR-11 or click the link in the description below. And that's it from me. Thank you to my co-hosts and have a lovely day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.